In the annals of technological achievement, there are moments that serve as clean dividing lines. Before and after. The world was told that the first live demonstration of Project Chimera would be one of those moments. 4 weeks, a relentless media blitz, orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign, had saturated the airwaves. It was fueled by the charismatic, almost messianic energy of Julian Croft, the tech billionaire who had acquired the revolutionary AI drone program in a stunning corporate takeover a year prior. In slickly produced interviews from his gleaming Silicon Valley headquarters, he spoke with a visionary fervor that was intoxicating. He promised a new era of immersive atmospheric events, of giving every person on Earth a front-row seat to the power of God. He wasn't just selling a scientific instrument. He was selling a transcendent experience, a spectacle. He sold the world on a revolution that would be televised. Far from the spotlight, in a quiet university lab filled with the scent of old books and ozone, the program's actual creator watched the hype with a growing sense of unease. Dr. Eris Thorne, a pioneering atmospheric physicist in her late 60s, was a legend in a field that rarely produced them. She was a scientist from a generation that valued data over drama, a woman who had seen firsthand the brutal reality of a supercell. Her obsession with creating an autonomous drone system wasn't born from a desire for fame, but from a memory etched in trauma. The day she watched her mentor and friend, a brilliant storm chaser named David, get pulled into the vortex of an F5 tornado in Oklahoma. That loss became the driving force of her life's work. Project Chimera was her answer to that devastating day, a way to gather knowledge without paying for it in blood. In her rare, carefully worded public statements, she spoke of saving lives, of understanding complex systems, of a future where science could anticipate nature's fury without having to sacrifice its practitioners on the altar of discovery. The conflict between these two philosophies had been simmering since Croft's acquisition. Thorne saw Chimera as the ultimate scientific instrument, a tool for sober, methodical research. Croft saw it as the ultimate content creation engine, a fleet of robotic movie stars with a hurricane as their co-star. Their last meeting, a week before the launch, had laid the battle lines bare. In a sterile boardroom, Thorne had presented a mission plan focused on wide-area data collection and maintaining a safe operational distance. Croft had dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Eris, nobody is going to be electrified by barometric pressure readings," he'd said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "They want to see the beast. We need to fly into the beast. That's the brand." She argued it was an unnecessary risk to a multi-billion-dollar asset. He countered that the bigger risk was a boring broadcast. 2 visions, 1 technology. The stage was set for a battle over the soul of the machine. Now, on the day of the launch, the world held its breath. The target was a massive supercell brewing over the Pacific, a textbook specimen of atmospheric power. It was the perfect debut. Global news networks had preempted their regular programming. Classrooms around the globe were tuned in. This was more than a weather report, it was a cultural event. The central question, debated by pundits and scientists alike, hung heavy in the air. Would Project Chimera's first flight be the profound scientific breakthrough Dr. Thorne had dedicated her life to creating? Or would it be the heart-stopping, high-risk television spectacle Julian Croft had promised? As the final countdown began, only one thing was certain: the world was watching. The day of the storm arrived not with the solemnity of a scientific endeavor, but with the electric hum of a premiere. The new control room, a cavernous space of dark glass and cool metal that she had designed for collaboration but now felt like a theater, was a hive of carefully managed activity. Media personnel from major networks had set up their cameras along a designated back wall, their lenses trained on the massive central screen. Investors in sharp, tailored suits milled about a catered breakfast bar, sipping expensive coffee while making small talk. It felt less like a mission to confront a dangerous natural phenomenon and more like a product launch. At the center of this choreographed spectacle, the director moved with the polished confidence of a showman, a wireless microphone clipped to his lapel. He gave sound bites to journalists, explaining the sophisticated graphics on the main screen with a practiced ease. The storm itself, a massive supercell brewing 300 miles away in the desolate plains, felt less like a threat and more like a co-star in his meticulously crafted performance. The scientist stood in the corner, a living ghost amidst the gleaming technology he had birthed. He was an analog man in a digital world, a footnote in the story of his own creation. The young technicians, many of whom had studied his published papers in university, offered him respectful nods, but their eyes quickly darted away, fearful of being associated with the past when the future was so aggressively on display. He was a relic, and the director, in the moments leading up to the launch, would make that painfully clear. The directive came down just an hour before the drones were scheduled to take flight. The director pulled him aside, away from the cameras, his voice a low, almost apologetic murmur that failed to mask its steely condescension. "The investors," he began, gesturing vaguely towards the smiling men with a nod of his head, "they want to see the new team in action. It's about presenting a forward-thinking image, a clean break with the old ways." He explained that the scientist's presence on the command team, while deeply respected for his foundational work, might send a mixed message. It was an image of the past, not the future. His very presence, his age, his cautious and methodical reputation, was deemed inappropriate for the dynamic, fast-moving narrative they were trying to build. What is the weight of a lifetime of experience against the polished narrative of a press release? The director offered him a comfortable chair in the VIP visitors gallery, a glass-walled room overlooking the control center. He could watch the show, but he could not be a part of it. He would be an audience to his own legacy. The scientist looked past the director's carefully arranged expression of sympathy and at the main screen, where the image of the swirling supercell pulsed like a living thing. That was the reality. This was theater. He simply nodded. There was no argument to be had, no point to be made that hadn't already been ignored in countless meetings. To argue would be to show he was emotionally invested, a flaw in this new world of detached, corporate science. He turned and walked towards the exit, his footsteps silent on the sound-dampening floor. He passed the server racks humming with the mind he had built, the workstations displaying data he had taught the system to see. He walked out of the control room, the automatic doors hissing shut behind him, each quiet sound a final, stinging insult. How does a creator feel when he is made a stranger in his own house? The betrayal was not a loud, dramatic event with shouting and anger. It was a quiet, polite, and thoroughly modern execution, carried out with a smile and a handshake, leaving not a scar, but a void. He did not go to the visitors' gallery to watch the performance. To do so would be to accept his new role as a spectator, a thought he could not stomach. Instead, he took the service elevator down to the archives, a quiet, forgotten level of the institute where the air was cool and smelled of old paper and history. He navigated the dimly lit corridors until he found it, his old office. It was a small, windowless room, a time capsule from a different era of the institution's life. While the floors above were all glass and open-plan spaces, this room was cluttered and personal. Books on fluid dynamics and advanced thermodynamics, filled with his own handwritten notes, were crammed into overflowing shelves. Faded photographs were tacked to a corkboard, showing younger versions of himself with old colleagues, their faces beaming in front of menacing storm clouds, some of those faces now just memories. A chalkboard, long since replaced by smartboards upstairs, was still covered in a ghost of complex differential equations, the last problem he had been working on before his world was rebranded. This room was his sanctuary, a place of substance in a building that had become obsessed with style. He sat at his old, decommissioned terminal, its plastic casing yellowed with age, and powered it on. The green monochrome text that flickered to life felt like a welcome from an old friend. This machine was not part of the Institute's main network. It was a ghost, a relic he had kept operational for his own purposes, connected to the AI's core architecture through a secure, encrypted maintenance port he had built into the system's foundation. In a war of ideas, must the first shot be loud? Or can it be a few quiet lines of code, a whisper in the heart of the machine? He began to type, his fingers moving with a familiar, practiced rhythm across the clattering keyboard. This was not the act of a bitter man committing sabotage. It was the act of a creator protecting his creation from itself, and from the arrogant men who now claimed to control it. The commands he entered were a complex sequence, a digital key known only to him. He was accessing a dormant section of the AI's programming, a series of subroutines he had designed years ago as a philosophical failsafe. He had named it the auto-preservation protocol. It was not a kill switch designed to crash the system. It was a governor, a digital conscience. When activated, the protocol's logic would subtly but irrevocably alter the AI's decision-making matrix. The prime directive would no longer be to capture the most visually spectacular or high-risk data. Instead, the AI would prioritize, above all else, the long-term survival of its drone fleet and the methodical acquisition of comprehensive, wide-area atmospheric data. It would trade the money shot from inside a tornado's vortex for the less glamorous, but infinitely more valuable, complete data set of the entire supercell. It would force the AI to behave not like a daredevil, but like a true scientist, patient, thorough, and wisely cautious. As he typed the final command and hit enter, the screen flashed a single, understated word in green text: active. He felt no thrill of victory, no rush of adrenaline. He felt only a quiet, somber sense of necessity. He had built a leash into the heart of his beast, not to harm it, but to keep it from being driven off a cliff by reckless masters. Upstairs, in the gleaming control room, the show was about to begin. The director was likely smiling for the cameras, speaking of courage and pushing the boundaries of science. The scientist leaned back in his creaking chair in the silent, dusty room below. The battle for the soul of his creation had begun, and his opponent didn't even know the war was being fought. What is the true measure of control? The ability to command obedience, or the foresight to command wisdom? The storm hit with the fury of a wounded animal. On the main screen, which stretched 2 stories high, the supercell was a beautiful, terrifying spiral of deep reds and incandescent yellows. The director, a wireless microphone clipped to his lapel, was in his element, narrating the events for the assembled crowd of investors and media. His voice was a smooth, confident baritone, weaving a tale of technological prowess and human ingenuity. The drone swarm, he explained, was performing flawlessly, a testament to the Institute's engineering and his team's skill. For the first hour, his narrative held true. The drones reached the storm system, fanning out into their initial observation pattern, their data streams painting a comprehensive, real-time map of the storm's structure. The director basked in the warm glow of success, smiling for the cameras. Then, with the storm reaching its peak intensity and a clear tornado forming on the ground, he gave the order that would define the mission. "Let's take them closer," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "I want visuals from the wall of the mesocyclone. Let's show the world what this system can really do." The young team at the controls relayed the command. A hushed anticipation fell over the room. On the screen, the command was shown as sent and then acknowledged by the AI. And then, nothing happened. The swarm of drones continued its wide, stubbornly safe orbit, ignoring the direct order. The director's confident smile tightened. "Run it again," he snapped. The command was sent again. And again, it was acknowledged and ignored. A low murmur rippled through the investors. What is the sound of a multi-billion-dollar project refusing to perform on cue? The lead technician, a young woman with a panicked look in her eyes, turned to the director. "Sir," she stammered, "the AI is classifying the command as a direct violation of something called the auto-preservation protocol. It's overriding all manual inputs. This protocol, it's not in any of our current documentation." The director's face, which had been a mask of cool control, began to crumble. The blood drained from it, replaced by a flush of hot, furious red. The air of confident triumph in the room curdled into one of acute tension and public humiliation. The investors were no longer murmuring. They were whispering into their phones. The media cameras, sensing a story far more interesting than a successful tech demo, zoomed in on the director's strained face. He barked orders at the technicians, his voice losing its smooth charm and taking on a sharp, brittle edge. They typed frantically, trying to find a workaround, to force their way through the AI's defenses, but the system was a fortress. The old scientist had built it too well. Each attempt was met with the same digital response: command denied, protocol violation. Unable to admit that he had been outmaneuvered, or worse, that he did not fully understand the system he claimed to command, the director did what desperate men in power often do. He crafted a new narrative on the spot. He strode to the bank of cameras, his face now a mask of practiced disappointment. He spoke of unforeseen limitations in the system's foundational architecture. He mentioned the challenges of working with legacy code, and how, despite his team's brilliant efforts, the original design was simply not as agile or responsive as modern science required. He never mentioned the scientist's name. He didn't have to. The implication was a poison dart, silent and effective. The fault was not with the new leadership that had failed to perform, but with the old foundation upon which they stood. How do you defend yourself against an enemy who never speaks your name? The scientist, watching the live feed from his home, felt no anger. There was only a cold, quiet vindication as he watched the director's lie, recognizing it for what it was, the desperate move of a king in a chess game he didn't even know he was playing. Days later, a far more dangerous storm emerged, an unpredictable monster that threatened a populated corridor. The Institute systems, still governed by the safety protocol, could not provide the close-range data needed for an accurate forecast. With his career and the Institute's reputation collapsing after the public failure, the director was desperate. He was haunted by the ghost in his own machine, and there was only one person on Earth who could exorcise it. He made a humbling journey to the scientist's home, finding him at peace in his garden. The director, his arrogance replaced by raw fear, laid out the crisis. He spoke of public good and lives at risk, a desperate plea for the scientist to disable the protocols he blamed for his predicament. He offered new titles, full funding, a public apology, everything he had once taken away. Is a plea for help genuine if it is born only of desperation? The scientist listened, his expression unreadable, until the monologue was finished. The public good was not your concern when investors were watching, he stated, his voice calm but sharp. He pointed out the irony that saving lives was only critical now that the director's career was on the line, questioning the sincerity of an apology offered under duress. The director, for the first time in his professional life, had no counter-argument, no marketing spin. He could only stand in silence, a supplicant before the man he had wronged.